one. I just want to win. My whole life I've been about winning and playing the game the right way. And so when you win this many championships, they all mean a great deal to you because it's hard to win. People have asked me a lot of questions over the years. They ask about Michigan State. They ask about the 1,979 national championship, 5-time NBA champ. They ask about March Madness. Sometimes it's about those no-look passes. Sometimes it's about how everything changed after college. I never mind any of those conversations. Those memories are part of my life, and they always will be. But every now and then, someone asks a question that makes me stop for a second before I answer. Magic, who are the greatest college basketball players you ever faced? Now, that's not as simple as it sounds. Most people hear the word greatest and immediately think about championships or scoring records or who went on to become the biggest NBA star. There's nothing wrong with that. Those things matter. They should. But that's never been the first thing that comes to my mind. When I think about greatness, I think about the players who forced me to grow, the ones who made me prepare differently before a game, the ones who challenged every decision I made once the ball was tipped. Sometimes it wasn't because they scored 40 points. Sometimes it was because they never seemed to make the wrong play. Sometimes it was the way they led an entire team without saying very much at all. Those are the players who stay with you. So this isn't my list of the most famous college players. It isn't a ranking. It's simply 5 men who changed the way I looked at college basketball. And the first one taught me that a point guard could completely control a game without ever trying to steal the spotlight. I've got to begin with Phil Ford. Now, I know that might surprise some people. When fans talk about the greatest college players, they usually jump straight to the names that won national championships or became NBA superstars. Phil deserves to be in that conversation too, but that's not why I remember him. I remember watching him when I was still growing into my own game. Back then, I was already in love with passing the basketball. I loved pushing the pace. I loved making something exciting happen. Then I watched Phil Ford running offense. He wasn't trying to put on a show. He wasn't chasing headlines. He just seemed to make every possession make sense. That impressed me. Long before I ever reached Michigan State, coaches and players talked about Phil with a tremendous amount of respect. If you wanted to understand how a college point guard should lead a team, his name always found its way into the conversation. What made him special wasn't one spectacular move. It was the way he controlled an entire game without making it look difficult. He always knew when to speed things up. He always knew when to slow everything down. He saw passes before other players even realized they were available. And maybe more importantly, his teammates trusted him completely. That's something statistics never fully capture. A point guard carries a different responsibility. You don't just worry about your own game. You have to understand everyone else's game too. You have to know who needs the ball, who needs confidence, who needs to settle down. Watching Phil, I realized that leadership could be quiet. It didn't always have to be loud. It didn't always have to come from scoring 30 points. Sometimes it came from making 10 perfect decisions in a row. Dean Smith built North Carolina around that kind of leadership. That wasn't an accident. Phil became the National Player of the Year in 1978 because he made winning basketball look simple, even though everybody who has ever played this game knows it isn't. When I eventually became a college point guard myself, I understood even more clearly why people admired him so much. Every possession begins with trust. If your teammates trust your decisions, everything else becomes easier. If they don't, talent only takes you so far. I've always loved playing with flair. I loved making people smile. But Phil Ford reminded me that before a point guard entertains anybody, he has to earn the confidence of the four teammates standing beside him. That's the lesson that stayed with me. Not a particular game, not a particular box score. Just the understanding that real greatness starts with making everyone around you believe they're playing their best basketball. Looking back now, the next name comes from someone I actually had to play against, Larry Bird. People have spent decades talking about our rivalry. Most of those conversations began with the 1979 national championship game. That's understandable. It was the biggest stage either of us had ever played on. But my respect for Larry didn't begin after that game. It began while we were preparing for it. The more film we watched, the more I realized this wasn't an ordinary player. He wasn't the fastest guy on the floor. He wasn't going to outrun everybody. He wasn't going to overwhelm you with pure athleticism. What he did was even harder to defend. He thought the game 1 or 2 plays ahead of everyone else. You'd think you had him figured out, then he'd throw a pass nobody expected. Or he'd drift into an open spot before the defense even recognized the danger. He made basketball look simple. That's one of the hardest things any player can do. As a point guard, I appreciated that immediately. I knew how difficult it was to see the entire floor while 10 players were moving at once. Larry seemed to do it naturally. He understood spacing, timing, patience. He never looked rushed, and he never seemed intimidated by the moment. When we met in Salt Lake City for the championship, everybody treated it like 2 undefeated teams fighting for the title. They were right. Michigan State entered that game with a 31-6 record. Indiana State came in undefeated at 33-0. The entire country was watching. We won 75-64. People still remember the score. They remember the television ratings. They remember it as the beginning of our rivalry. What I remember most is something different. I remember walking off that court knowing I just played against someone who loved competing as much as I did. That mattered because talent gets you to big games. Competitiveness decides what happens once you get there. Years later, people tried to compare us. Who was better, who accomplished more, who changed basketball. I never looked at it that way. Larry pushed me. He forced me to become a smarter player. Every time our names were mentioned together, I felt challenged to improve another part of my game. That started before the NBA. It started in college. The greatest opponents don't just test your skills. They raise your standards. They make you practice with more purpose. They make you think more carefully. And even after all these years, when I think about what college basketball gave me, one of the first things that comes to mind is the privilege of sharing that stage with Larry Bird. Let me stay with that 1979 tournament for a moment because another player from that run earned my respect in a completely different way. Sidney Moncrief. If Larry Bird challenged your mind, Sidney challenged every part of your game. We met Arkansas in the regional semifinal on our way to the Final Four. I'd heard plenty about him before we ever stepped onto the floor. Everybody talked about how complete he was. After playing against him, I understood exactly what they meant. There weren't many weaknesses to find. He could score when his team needed points. He could defend the other team's best player. He rebounded. He handled the ball. He made smart decisions. No matter what the game demanded, Sidney seemed comfortable doing it. Those are the players coaches love. You never have to wonder whether they're going to help you win. They always do. What impressed me most wasn't any single play. It was his consistency. Some players can dominate for 5 minutes. Others can put together one incredible half. Sidney gave you the same effort from the opening tip until the final buzzer. As a point guard, I noticed players like that. you couldn't relax for even one possession. The second you lost your concentration, he made you pay for it. I respected that. I've always believed basketball is about making the right play over and over again. Sidney understood that better than almost anyone I faced in college. Michigan State won that game and moved on, but winning didn't change how I felt about him. Sometimes the final score tells you who advanced. It doesn't always tell you how difficult the challenge really was. When I looked across the floor, I saw someone who cared about every possession, someone who competed without wasting energy trying to impress anybody. There was a quiet confidence about him. He didn't need attention. His game spoke loudly enough. Over the years, I've seen plenty of players with incredible talent. Talent can make people notice you. Character is what earns lasting respect. Sidney had both, and that's a rare combination. College basketball has always celebrated stars. There's nothing wrong with that. But championship teams are usually built around players who are willing to do everything. The scoring, the defense, the leadership, the little things that never make the highlight shows. Sidney Moncrief reminded me of that every time I watched him play. When I think about the competitors who helped shape my own understanding of winning, his name always belongs in the conversation because he proved that being a complete basketball player is about far more than filling up a stat sheet. It's about giving your team exactly what it needs every single night, whether anyone notices it or not. This one may surprise some people because I never faced David Thompson in an NCAA game. Our college careers didn't overlap that way. But if you're asking me about the greatest players who shaped the world I was stepping into, I can't leave him out. By the time I arrived at Michigan State, David Thompson had already become a legend. His name was everywhere. Players talked about him. Coaches studied him. Young kids wanted to play like him. Long before social media and 24-hour sports channels, word traveled fast when somebody was truly special. David was one of those players. The first time I watched film of him, I remember thinking that he didn't look like anyone else. He seemed to spend more time in the air than on the floor. Today, fans have seen plenty of incredible athletes. Back then, it felt different. What David was doing looked almost impossible. But after a while, I realized his jumping ability wasn't the biggest reason everyone respected him. It was the confidence he gave an entire program. North Carolina State believed they could beat anybody because he believed it first. That's real leadership. People remember the 1974 championship. They remember NC State ending UCLA's incredible run. That victory changed college basketball. For years, UCLA had been the mountain every program was trying to climb. David Thompson helped prove that mountain could be conquered. Sometimes one team changes a season. Sometimes one player changes the entire sport. I think David did a little of both. As I got older, I began to appreciate something else about his game. He played with joy. You could feel it. He loved competing. He loved entertaining the crowd, but he never lost sight of winning. That's a balance every great player tries to find. The fans come to enjoy the show. Your teammates depend on you to finish the job. David managed to do both. When I eventually found myself playing on the biggest stages, I understood why so many older players spoke about him with such admiration. He raised expectations. He made young players believe they could play with creativity without sacrificing discipline. He showed that excitement and team basketball could exist together. Every generation has someone who changes the picture for everyone who comes next. For my generation, David Thompson was one of those people. Even without sharing the court against him, I felt his influence. Sometimes greatness reaches you before you ever meet the person. Sometimes it changes the game before you even become part of it. That's exactly what David Thompson did for college basketball. And all these years later, I still believe his impact went far beyond the points he scored or the games he won. I'll finish with someone I know a lot of people weren't expecting, Greg Kelser. Most fans remember me from that Michigan State team. They remember the passes, the fast breaks, the championship. That's the way history usually works. One or two names stay in the spotlight, while others quietly become part of the background. But if you were in our locker room, you knew Greg wasn't in the background. He was one of the reasons everything worked. I remember my first practices with him. Right away, I could see how complete his game was. He could score inside. He could run the floor. He rebounded. He defended multiple positions. And he never complained about whatever role the team needed him to play. Those players are priceless. Every coach wants one. Every teammate trusts one. What impressed me most wasn't his talent. It was his willingness to sacrifice. There are players who can put up big numbers every night. Then there are players willing to give up numbers if it gives the team a better chance to win. Greg belonged in that second group. That kind of basketball isn't always celebrated. But it's championship basketball. The 1979 season is remembered for so many reasons. Our matchup with Indiana State, the undefeated team on the other side, the television audience, everything surrounding that championship game. Sometimes people forget how well Greg played that night. He scored 19 points. He attacked the basket. He defended. He did all the little things that help us win the biggest game in school history. I don't think we lift that trophy without him. That's not me being polite. That's simply the truth. One thing I learned at Michigan State is that chemistry isn't something you build overnight. It grows every day in practice, on road trips, in the locker room, during workouts when nobody else is watching. Greg was one of the players who made our team stronger long before we reached the Final Four. He brought consistency. He brought professionalism. He cared about winning more than recognition. I've always believed basketball is the ultimate team game. You can have all the talent in the world. If 5 players aren't connected, eventually somebody will expose you. Our team was connected. Greg had a lot to do with that. When people ask me about the greatest college players I've known, I don't only think about spectacular performances. I think about trust, because trust is what wins championships. Greg Kelser was someone every teammate trusted without hesitation. Looking back now, that's the highest compliment I can give any basketball player. Trophies eventually collect dust. Statistics become part of record books. But when your teammates still speak about you with gratitude decades later, you've accomplished something much bigger than basketball. Greg gave Michigan State that kind of legacy, and I was fortunate enough to share the court with him. When I look back on my years in college basketball, I don't think first about the trophies. I don't think about cutting down the nets. I don't even think about the games people still play on television every March. Those moments are unforgettable. They always will be. But time has a funny way of changing what matters most. As you get older, you begin to realize the banners hanging inside an arena are only part of the story. The people are what stay with you. The teammates who believed in you before anyone else did. The coaches who demanded more from you than you thought you had to give. The opponents who forced you to become a better player simply because they refused to let you take the easy way out. Those are the memories that never fade. Michigan State gave me much more than a chance to play basketball. It gave me lifelong friendships. It taught me responsibility. It taught me that leadership isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about making everyone around you believe they can accomplish something bigger than themselves. I'm grateful for every practice, every road trip, every packed arena, every difficult loss, and every unforgettable victory. Most of all, I'm grateful for the men who shared that journey with me and for the competitors who challenged me every single time we stepped onto the court. Without them, I never become the player people remember today. College basketball gave me an education that went far beyond the classroom. It gave me a second family. It gave me a purpose. And after all these years, that's the greatest championship I'll ever carry with me